Tolkien, defender of simplicity.
John Ronald Reuel Tolkien stood against industry and war by spreading the ideas of simplicity, showing how living with only the basics will provide a more prosperous life as opposed to excessive greed and hunger for power through his mastery of literature. Tolkien was born in South Africa. At a young age, he moved to a small farming community called Sarahome, conceived in the hilly countryside of England just outside Birmingham. As he grew, he was brought up on the ideas of simplicity, having lived there for a good portion of his life. Cars were a rare sight, and nothing beyond what was necessary could be found. His mother, Mabel Suffield, taught him from an early age. In 1900, Tolkien went to his first elementary school, King Edward's School. Tolkien first got interested in language from his teacher in this new school, who taught Chaucer and had his students read the Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English. Tolkien went to Oxford. There he joined a group club of authors, the Tea Club and Bavarian Society, or TCBS for short. They criticized and edited each other's works, and that is where Tolkien met his close friend and future contemporary C.S. Lewis. Throughout Tolkien's life, they maintained a friendship of helping each other. Academics were as important to Tolkien as his writings. His writings portrayed knowledge of history and literature.
Tolkien was drafted to fight for the British in World War I in 1917. He left during his college years and left behind a fiancée. He had no other possessions of importance, such as money. He fought in the Lancashire Fusiliers as an officer. Many of his companions were not as lucky as him and died in combat. Tolkien needed a way to get his mind off of the fighting in the Somme during the breaks in combat. He jotted down ideas for possible future stories. This is where Middle-earth was born and the worldwide phenomenon started. Middle-earth is the fictional world created by Tolkien. In this world, he put symbols of people, places, and things from the real world. This is where the Lord of the Rings takes place. Tolkien was affected by trench fever and was taken out of battle. This shows that Tolkien was influenced by the war on many levels, both physically and mentally. Tolkien housed evacuees during the war. In 1918, this is where he learned how war could tear families apart and destroy the lives that people worked so hard to build. After the war, Tolkien returned home and married the fiancée that he had been forced to leave, Edith. John and his wife enjoyed a loving relationship and had a son, Christopher. Despite his devotion to both literature and his studies, Tolkien was in fact a devout family man, remembered fondly by Christopher. Originally, Tolkien began writing The Hobbit as a book geared towards children, but later, he would find that he had set the stage to communicate his deeply seated thoughts and beliefs. The Hobbit served as a springboard for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which would become the crux of his stand, featuring the essential connections and ideas that would most impact the world. Later, his son Christopher would fulfill John's legacy through the completion of the book Silmarillion.
The current events of the world were a huge benefactor to the creation of The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the Silmarillion. There are many real-world people, places, and events that are evident throughout all of his works. Some of the more important and influential are as follows. Tolkien clearly stated that his works were to be viewed as English mythology, and Middle-earth was, in fact, intended to be Europe. This is because of the translation of the Elvish terms Harad, which means south. The characters from Harad were African, and Rhûn, which means east, represented characters from the east of Asian descent. Sarahome was the real-world equivalent of the Shire, and the people of Sarahome are represented by the hobbits. Both of these peoples lived very simple lives, untouched by most of industry and society, just living a basic day-to-day lifestyle. The people of Sarahome and the Shire were not prone to change and frowned upon it. Their real happiness lay in nature and its splendor. The One Ring is a symbol in the Lord of the Rings of industry and war. It was received as the industry of war, the creation of guns, tanks, planes, bombs, and other weapons of war. All it takes is one person with a corrupt mind to use technology to subdue and destroy the world. The ring has great powers to corrupt many who come in contact with its presence. This is evident in the dictators that rose to power during the World War eras, such as Hitler and Mussolini. In the books, the Nazgul represent these dictators, the fallen kings that fell corrupt to the powers of industry and war.
The The Council of Elrond created the Fellowship with the intention of uniting different people to destroy a common evil. This parallels the Triple Entente in World War I, which consisted of Britain, France, and America, and in World War II, it paralleled the Allied powers, which consisted of Britain, France, America, and Russia. Boromir was a weakness in the Fellowship, as was the views on communism in the Allied powers. They believed that Boromir, as well as Russia, was a strong ally, but the weakest link in the alliance. Frodo, the main ring bearer, represents the diversity of life. It can come to the small or the least expected to bring the change that the world needs. He is doubted of his skill, as was America in its early stages, but there is always more than meets the eye. In writing about Middle-earth, Tolkien illustrates the effect that industry and war has on the common man, and how such things should not be used. During World War II, the surrounding violence and chaos caused desperate people of all walks of life to seek some form of escapism. Thus, Tolkien's works sold as books that appeared to front an escapist allure at first glance, and attracted many readers. But upon reading the books, the people of the World War II era found that the ideas he portrayed in Middle-earth were so parallel to their own, that they instantly found themselves accepting Tolkien's influence about the events on the world stage. Tolkien took a stand by saying that simplicity is the way that one should live in order to defeat the evils of industry and war. This thought process was quickly accepted by the fear-stricken masses from the world wars. Tolkien felt that the industry destroys the sanctity of the simple life, and without this simple life there is no peace. This is exemplified in the book in the end of Return of the King with the industrialization of the Shire, because of which the simplistic lifestyle and innocence of the Shire was lost forever.
Tolkien believed that as long as there are still good men, uncorrupted by technology, evil cannot prevail, and Tolkien believed himself to be one of these men. This made Tolkien's stand possible to be accomplished by the world, because the people that fight for simplicity will keep the people that fight for industry in check, thus slowing the engulfing of every aspect of life. Tolkien viewed himself as the original Hobbit because he was against the needless conflict of men. Having been part of war, he felt that he had the obligation to demonstrate the error of human way for the good of all men. J.R.R. Tolkien retired at the age of 67. He spent the ending times of his life in peace. He would do interviews with anyone that needed his time, even though this caused him to lose focus on his works. He knew that interviews with people were very important and essential to sharing his ideas. During these years, he wrote Smith of Wootton Major. His wife became very ill, so he left Oxford to take care of his sick wife in privacy. Edith Tolkien died in November 1971. Even in the midst of the admiration of the millions whom he had influenced, Tolkien was still very affected and couldn't help but focus on his wife's death. After she died, Tolkien returned to Oxford.
Tolkien was awarded the CBE in 1972. Tolkien died at 81 in Bournemouth of pneumonia. He had left one of his books not finished because he did not see it ready for viewing of the public eye. He was a perfectionist. His son, Chris Tolkien, finished his book, The Silmarillion, that ended up being very popular among children and adults. Tolkien's works are a timeless classic that will live on for centuries to come. Its themes will carry on not only through current society, but also as well into the future, or even to the end of time. When the Persian Gulf War started, there was a need for themes in Tolkien's works. Thus, they made movies to resurrect simplicity in a more recognizable form of media in this day and age. 3 million copies of his books were sold between the publishing of his books and his retirement. Tolkien took a stand in history that will live on forever. His timeless works show how the evils of industry and war can be overcome with simplicity. His literature impacted every reader, including the readers of today, but perhaps his greatest time of communication was during World War II times, where the parallels were very prominent.